everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a little teaching video on how to knit with the sort of resurgence of analog hobbies coming back. I thought this would be a good opportunity to teach the people who don't know how to knit, because it is a skill that cannot be replaced by AI or machines. Everything that you buy, for the most part, has been hand knitted. There are things called knitting machines, but they do still require humans to operate them. They're like manual machines and you have to like crank it to get it to work. But I thought it's such an important skill to have because you can always build on it. You can make your own clothes, and you can repair your own clothes. Great for my fellow sustainability girlies as well. So, the first thing you need to acquire are a pair of knitting needles. These needles that I have here are a bit thicker than what you'd usually use for this type of wool. As a general rule, the thinner the wool that you use, the thinner the needle. This doesn't always have to be the case. Personally, I like using needles that are a little bit thicker than the wool that I'm using, but generally with these larger needles you'd be looking for a thicker type of wool. Doesn't really matter though, but the reason is if you knit with these large needles with this thin of a wool, the actual knots will be more spaced apart. I don't know a lot of the official terminology for what it's called when, like, I'm sure the knots that I'm referring to have a name, but as I said, I'm not down with the official lingo. So you want to get a pair of knitting needles, and as well you can get these in wood, plastic or metal. I'm using these plastic ones today, but I do prefer, if I'm knitting myself, I do prefer the wood ones. The metal ones aren't too bad either, but I find sometimes they can bow when you've been knitting a piece for a while, and I don't really like that. It just depends on the piece, to be honest. The second and really only other required thing is your yarn. This is just some scrap yarn that I had around, but you can find yarn in all different types of materials. You can also make yarn yourself if you have access to wool or just hair in general. It takes a lot of time, but it's not hard to do. I'm not too sure the blend of this, but I would assume acrylic. I am not purchasing any new synthetic wool. I plan to use up all of the synthetic wool that I have, and then anything that I've started purchasing from like halfway through last year has all been natural fibered wool. It is a bit more expensive, but to me that sacrifice in money is worth the quality and the peace of mind knowing that this is not leaching microplastics into the environment. Okay, so what you want to do to start, there are multiple different ways to start, and this is called casting on. Personally, the easiest way that I can show you how to do it is grab the end of your wool here. You want to, so like this, you want to make a loop like this. So just crossing over this piece like that. And then when you've got it like that, you want to pull. So sort of go over and pull it into a loop like this. Doesn't have to be too tight. I'll show you that again. So lay it flat on your hand like this with the long piece of wool that's still connected to the ball here. Make a loop, and then with that same long piece that's still connected to the wool, put it behind and pull it through that loop that you've just made, and then tug on this shorter piece to close that knot. Like I said, there are plenty of different ways to cast on, but I like to start when I'm showing other people like this. It's pretty much the easiest way. Then what you're gonna do is grab your needle and slide that. Now it's totally up to you how many times you want to add a stitch. You can do it as many or as little. Obviously, the more you do, the thicker whatever you're making is going to be. I'm just going to show you a very simple scarf that you can make. But like if you're making a sweater, you can make sweaters on these needles here, but generally you'll need the type that are connected at the ends with a loop, because sweaters are quite large. So it doesn't really matter how many times you want to add a stitch, it's totally up to you. I will say though, the more stitches you add, the faster you will go through your wool. Okay, so now that you're at this point, what you want to do is grab the wool in your hand and lay it flat across your hand like this, and then you want to put it over your thumb and your index finger, so wrap it behind your thumb and your index finger, like as I'm showing you here, and then you want to put your needle under the wool just here and pull, and that creates your second stitch like that. It is a little bit complicated if you haven't done it before, but trust me, once you have, it's the easiest thing. Again, I sort of ditch the index finger because I find it's faster, but you want to put the wool behind your thumb, and then in this opening here you want to put the needle under the yarn, let go and pull, and then you can see here that that creates the loop, and then it's secured by the overlapping, and then you just pull it tight, and along the bottom here you'll start to get this sort of weave happening. Again, you want to keep doing this until you have as many stitches as you like. I also chose like a bigger needle today because I thought it would be easier to show what's happening. It is not easier in this specific part though, because it's getting in the way. So just one more time. Wool, hold your needle like this. The wool that is hanging off your needle that is attached to the ball, you want to put it over your thumb here, wrap it around just like this, and then go under the wool here. Move your thumb out of the way so it's like this, and then pull down. I'm just going to add a few more, but as I said, you can add as many as you like. They don't have to be in odds or even numbers, but I like to do even. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We'll do one more, 12. And you just want to keep that number of stitches at the back of your mind, because sometimes when you first start especially, you can add a stitch accidentally or drop a stitch accidentally, and we don't want to do that because that'll decrease or increase the width and it will start to look a bit funny. So it's just good to keep in your mind how many stitches you have, write it down. You can also find in more complicated pieces, there are certain tools that you can use when knitting, certain stitch markers and stuff like that, but for a simple scarf like this, that's totally unnecessary. Okay, so now that we have our bottom, this where the stitches are is always going to be, if you're right-handed, I think if you're left-handed as well, it's always going to be in your left hand. So I'm going to put that here in my left hand. I'm just going to move the microphone a bit. Okay, now this is where the wool will be off the top here. Now I'm going to teach you how to start actually knitting the bit that we just did. That's the easy bit. This is the harder bit. It's kind of difficult with my setup right now, but I'll try. Okay, so what you want to do, you want to make sure that it looks like this, and the first thing you want to do is this stitch here at the top. You want to, I'm just trying to get this on camera so you can see. You want to, this is the stitch, this is what it looks like. This hole here, this is where you want to put your needle, and you want it just to be like that. In hindsight, it's actually kind of difficult with these needles, but once your stitch looks like that, you want to bring this wool over the back needle, and it looks like this. You want to move it there and flick that off. You just did your first stitch. Congratulations. So this is the basic knit pattern that I'm going to show you. This is what people say when they say they're knitting. There are different ways that you can do a stitch and it will create different patterns, but you may have heard a purl, which is just a backwards knit, and that creates a different pattern in the knitting, but we'll get to that, hold on. So again, in the back here, so it's like under and in here is where you want to put this needle. Wrap this around the back needle like that, and it will look like this. You've got the new wool over the top there, and then you want to push this down and push this through in that hole there and flick that off. Again, it's actually way more difficult to film this than I thought. You want to slip your needle in here, just in the back there, right? And then you want to go around the back of the needle and push through, taking that new bit of wool with you. Again, through the back of the stitch, so you can sort of see it looks like that. Around the back of the needle, through, and flick that off. So I'm just going to Oops, see, sometimes you can accidentally go like that, but if you take that off now, you will lose a stitch. So you want to be really careful and make sure that you make sure you're putting it on right. When you get really good at knitting, you won't have to concentrate so hard on the stitches being right, because you'll just know, it's like a muscle memory. But when you're learning, you definitely do need to concentrate. Alright, then once you're at the last stitch, nothing special needs to happen. It's exactly the same as all the others. Alrighty, there we go. So we have just done our first row. It looks a bit holey because, as I said, this wool is too thin for these needles, but it is for demonstration purposes, I suppose. Okay, so now when you've got this flipped over, it's going to look like this, and we're just going to ignore this because this is all of the stitching that you just did. So again, we're going to go through this part here, around the back and through there, slip it off. Whoops, not slip that off. And we're just going to keep going with that. Like I said, the more you do it and the more you get the feeling of needles in your hand, and like you get used to that feeling, the easier and quicker you will get. Okay, normally when you're knitting, you'll want to sort of spread this out as you go, but because I'm only doing such a small thing, that's fine. So now you've added an extra row. Yay. Alright. I don't know why this one here is so big. I don't know what I did there. Just ignore that. Alright, so again, this is your ending here. You want to slip it in between here and here. And for the most part, you do want to keep the wool quite taut. The tighter your grip, the tighter the stitches will look, the looser the wool, and the bigger the stitches, the more sort of messy it will look. But you don't want to do it too tight, because then you won't be able to slip your needle easily into the stitches, if that makes sense. So there is sort of a sweet spot, but again, that is something that you figure out over time. In your first couple of projects, you might hold it too tight, and you'll notice that it's a lot more difficult to sort of slip the needles in, and then sometimes you'll do it too loose and you'll be able to tell as well. There we go. So this has been 4 rows, and you can see it's taking form. And like I said, this is just the basic knit, just creates these in and out patterns like that. We'll do one more, and then I'm going to show you the current scarf that I am working on. It uses uses a different type of knitting pattern. I'm not too sure what it's called, but it's really, really pretty. And I don't really see people knit with it that often. The most common like alternative knit that you'll see people use is the pearl. But personally, I have never been a fan of the finger placements when you do a pearl, so I like this other way better. Okay, there we go. How cool. Okay, here I have my current project. Like I said, I don't know the exact name of the stitch I'm using, but it creates this absolutely stunning fishtail braid type of look. I am using my preferred, these are 6mm bamboo needles. I prefer these to this type of needle to any of the other materials. That's totally a personal preference, and once you start knitting more, you will figure out which type you like. But hold on, this I've been working on for a while, but you can see here it's quite long but quite skinny, which I like, and I love the colour palette. But as you can see, it's actually a fishtail, which I'm obsessed with. I think it looks so good. I have knitted another scarf with the same pattern, but it's a little thicker and it's purple. I'm gonna knit a row with you of this scarf, but do not feel intimidated at all. This is a much more advanced stitch. Okay, for this one though, you want to get your first stitch, and for this we start off normal, so we go around and through just like normal, but instead of continuing on normally, we put the stitch over and just push that on, so we're not knitting a stitch, and then over, under, push that stitch on. And I don't know exactly how it works, but because we're skipping a stitch, it creates that fishtail pattern. And what I was talking about before of the stitches being too tight, I'm not sure if you could hear that sound, but that's essentially happening right now. The stitches are like making this really, like, okay, I have to sort of like push it to get it to go onto the needle. That means that I did these last ones a bit too tight. So, as I said, you will figure out what works best for you. It just takes a matter of time. But the best thing about sort of these hand crafts is that it is so worth figuring out, because it is so rewarding when you've created this amazing thing from scratch with just your hands. Love it, absolutely incredible. I'll do one more normal one with you. loose. Go behind and through. In behind, around and through. In behind, around, through. In behind, around, through. In behind, around, through. In behind, around, through. In behind, around and 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 through. Okay, let's say that you've knitted your scarf and you are finished. You're like, yep, this is a good length. I don't want any more. There's a few different ways that you can cast off, but the simplest way that I remember is to, okay, take this middle stitch here and going to loop it over this back one, and then take this next one. Actually, no, that doesn't work. Never mind, ignore my advice there. I thought that's how you did it, but I've just remembered. No, what you want to do is, okay, get your needle like this, go around, and then this through. Oh wait, no. Knit this one. See, now I can't get it through. See daisy. And then here. Like that. Knit this next one. Put this one over that stitch that you just knit. Like that. Then knit this next one. And then put this last stitch over that one. Knit this next one and put the last stitch over the new one. And then you keep going, and then I'll show you what to do when you reach the final one. This bit can be a little bit fiddly, like actually getting the stitch over the last one that you did. Okay, you can use the needle to help, but because I've got nails, I can just use those. Did I not get that over properly? Okay, almost done here. Pull it over. The last one, knit it, push it through, and then same deal, you're gonna go over. Alright, so here we have, you've cast off, and you've got this bit here. What you want to do is cut your wool, and then you want to thread that cut bit through here, and it will make this little knot, pretend that this tail doesn't exist, and then you've got this little tail just like this one, and you've got your piece, and then you can either cut it right up to here, or you can thread weave them through, because I think that it looks better. It makes everything look more sort of secure, and you won't have any sort of fraying edges. But once you've thread them through, your piece will look like the finished scarf, and that's it. You've done it. You've just knitted your first scarf, and it is so incredibly rewarding. And the best part is that if you make a mistake, you can just undo the mistake you made and start again. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this little video. I would be happy to make one teaching you how to crochet as well if you're interested. It's also quite simple but daunting, as most of these handcraft things are. Thank you again so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment down below if you end up knitting something. I would love to hear how you go if you take on a project. And don't forget to be kind to yourself if this is your first time trying something like this. It does take time and it does take practice, but be patient with yourself, because it's definitely something pretty much everyone can do. Like I said, thank you so much, and I will see you in my next video.